Autism and stimming often go hand in hand. Typically, if you interact with an individual who's got ASC, you're going to see their unique forms of stimming. And stimming is self regulation. Typically, it is maybe hand flapping or spinning. Those are going to be the most kind of iconic and well represented forms in like the media and in children's shows and things like that. But sometimes stimming looks very different, and honestly, it can be a little bit intimidating, especially if you haven't been around it before or if perhaps the person who's stimming happens to be a 6'3" adult. So we're going to walk through the psychology of why these individuals engage in that particular behavior to self-regulate, as well as kind of how our own brains work and how really everybody stims to some extent. So my hope is that this episode will take the fear factor out of it and make these behaviors a little more understandable. Welcome back to the Aletheia Project. So first of all, what is stimming? Stimming is a type of sensory seeking or regulating behavior that kind of helps work to calm the nervous system. And when it comes to regulation in autism, you're typically going to see two types. You're going to see the kiddos and adults who are very much prone to sensory seeking, and you are going to see the adults and kiddos who are very much prone to sensory avoiding. And so we're going to start out by talking about sensory seeking. Sensory seeking behaviors can be things like climbing, which we often see from our lovely content creator, Evie the Explorer. Thrashing around the water can also be a method of sensory regulation and stimming. Evan is a great example of that.
My heart is yours. She that I hold on to. That's what I do.
But regardless of what this type of sensory seeking behavior looks like, ultimately it's helping to calm the nervous system. The brain is pretty interesting in that it is going to prefer a specific method of sensory input in order to kind of calm itself. So I don't know if you have ever been in a relationship or maybe you have kids and some of your kiddos really like light touch, like they don't mind if you're like going on their arm like this or if you're kind of putting the top of their head, and other kiddos will get super annoyed and overstimulated by that, and they prefer more deep pressure, right? Like holding their hand or kind of pressing on their shoulders. That is that sensory seeking or sensory avoiding behavior kind of manifesting. So in our heavy sensory seekers, especially in our autistic adults who maybe have higher support needs, this is kind of what I have seen when we've been out in public settings, when I've taken kiddos out and about, that has maybe drawn some glances. And so I felt like might be beneficial to help other people understand. So the first story is going to be, I was hanging out with one of my kiddos and we were at the park. We were swinging, he was twirling, he was having a great time. And kind of part of what he does to get that sensory input he needs, but also to connect with people, is he'll run up to you and he'll grab your hand and he'll press it really hard to his chin, right? And that's his way, first of making connection, but it's also kind of that sensory seeking behavior, right? He's grounding himself in space. He's reminding his brain where his body is in space and kind of where he is in relation to this new person that he's interacting with. And obviously that's not going to be intimidating for anyone who knows him. That's just his way of saying hello. But for the other children at the park who have never seen that type of behavior before, it can be kind of intimidating when a random child just runs up to you and grabs your hand, right? And also as a parent, you can kind of be confused. How do I react to this? How do I explain this to my child? And to that, I would say, it's honestly really important to have conversations about stimming with your kids for that reason, because you never know when they might have the opportunity to interact with somebody who might communicate a hello in a different way. Another method that you might see is maybe at the pool in the summertime, somebody who is splashing around in the water, kind of throwing themselves all over the place because that water is giving really good sensory input. That's again kind of reminding the body and the brain where they are in space and helping them stay regulated and have a good time. Our sensory seekers also will enjoy, or they can enjoy, fidgets like this that you can really kind of stretch and pull on and bully, and they're not going to budge because it's giving that good sensory input, right? They're able to clench their fists without hurting themselves or anyone else in kind of a safe and regulating way. The flip side of sensory is going to be the sensory avoiders. And these are the kiddos who are going to get more overstimulated by tactile input. So you'll see kiddos who wear, these heavy duty noise canceling headphones. Maybe these are the kiddos who are going to use more like temperature based fidgets or things that are softer and more regulating when in public that they can really focus their attention on to be less distracted by the noises and the lights around them. They're going to be more sensitive to the pitch of your voice, the volume of the music, and ultimately their safe space is spaces that are familiar, calm, and quiet. And I've seen a lot of parents and special ed teachers and even mainstream education teachers kind of build out these sensory corners, right? For these kiddos and adults who might be more sensitive to sensory input, they'll put really cool things like, lava lamps and different softer textures, weighted blankets, things that are going to kind of meet that regulation need more on the quieter end for those that are sensory avoiders. And here's some really cool examples that I love. The interesting thing about stimming is that it actually isn't necessarily unique to autism. Yes, kiddos with autism may need to engage in this form of self-regulation a little bit more so than you or I would, but everybody has sensory preferences, right? I'm sure you can relate to putting on a t-shirt that's got an itchy tag in the back. It's going to drive you cuckoo bananas if you don't cut it off. Or when you're in an office and the fluorescent lighting is just too much because it's so bright and painful. We've all got sensory preferences. It's just individuals with autism, A, they tend to be more extreme, and B, sometimes it's a little bit harder to understand the behavior being linked to a sensory regulation. So again, it's going to be like that hand to the chin, right? Something that may seem abnormal or even aggressive is really just a form of self-regulation. And so why do I explain all this? Well, because I'm hoping that in understanding why these kiddos are seeking sensory input and all the different ways that they can seek it, running, climbing, jumping, isolating themselves in a dark room, whatever happens to work best for their bodies, and hoping to kind of give you a bigger picture of what this could look like, my idea is that I hope to take some of the intimidation factor out of it, right? Because really and truly, if somebody is being, they're stimming loudly or they're flapping their hands or they're spinning around or maybe they're being a little bit disruptive in public, our tendency and our brain's tendency can be to automatically signal danger because it's a behavior that is not commonly associated with an adult or an older child. And I really kind of want to break that stigma because stimming is autistic joy. That's what people with autism say themselves. That is how they experience the world, how they orient themselves, and really how they kind of express their own emotions in the moment. And so if you can kind of learn to view it A, with an open mind, and B, with the idea that stimming truly gives you kind of a glimpse into their world, into their brain, and into how they're processing all the things. It's such a unique and special tool in being able to get to know that person. So having those conversations with your kids if they go to public school, or just making a mental note when you're ready to go out into a public space where you may interact with people with autism, to remember that stimming is not scary. It's just a form of self-regulation and self-expression. And when in doubt about a particular behavior, never be afraid to just ask. It's always better to have a conversation and maybe learn something than to just be that obnoxious person who is staring. So I hope you feel empowered. I hope you feel like you have a little bit of a better grasp on sensory seeking and sensory input, and that you now can say with confidence that you are not afraid of any and all types of stimming. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Aletheia Project. If you liked, loved, or hated what you heard, please feel free to comment down below, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you next time.